Commander Jazek Phoom's antennae twitched nervously as he stood before the Grand Strategic Council. His datapad clutched so tightly in his upper appendages that the casing creaked. The 7-foot-tall, blue-skinned military strategist had faced countless battles across 3 galactic sectors, but nothing terrified him more than what he was about to propose. "With all due respect, Admiral Cryon," Jazek said, clearing his third breathing passage, "the Voidcrawlers have decimated our outer defense systems. Our conventional tactics are failing spectacularly." Admiral Cryon, a massive granite-skinned being with luminescent eyes that changed color with his mood, currently a dangerous crimson, leaned forward. "Get to the point, Commander. What's this unconventional solution you've been hinting at?" Jazek's secondary heart rate accelerated. "Sir, I propose we activate the last resort protocol." The council chamber erupted in gasps and chirps of alarm. 3 junior officers nearly fainted. Admiral Cryon's eyes flashed from crimson to stark white, pure shock. "You cannot be serious," Cryon thundered, pounding his massive fist on the obsidian table. "The humans? The humans? Have you completely lost your neural functions?" Jazek expected this reaction. Every species in the Galactic Alliance knew about the humans. They were quarantined to their solar system for good reasons. Unpredictable, chaotic, completely disrespectful of proper battle etiquette. "Sir, hear me out. The Voidcrawlers have conquered 17 systems in 6 lunar cycles. Our battle simulations predict total Alliance collapse within a standard year. The humans." Jazek paused, struggling with the words, "have certain qualities that might prove effective against an enemy that has countered every predictable strategy in our arsenal." "You mean they're completely insane," muttered Science Officer Lumi Tazar from the second row. "They intentionally jump out of perfectly functional aircraft. For fun. They consume beverages that temporarily poison their cognitive functions recreationally," added Fleet Commander Norks. "And their entertainment?" Cryon shook his massive head. "They watch simulations of their own species dying in increasingly creative ways." Jazek nodded grimly. "Exactly. And that's precisely why we need them." The room fell silent as Jazek activated a holographic display showing footage from the ancient archives, of humans in primitive battle gear swarming over entrenched positions, humans using tactics so bizarre they defied military logic, humans laughing, while charging into certain doom. "The last resort protocol exists for a reason, Admiral," Jazek said quietly. "It was created for precisely this scenario when all reasonable, civilized approaches have failed, when we face extinction." Admiral Cryon's eyes slowly shifted to a contemplative blue. "Commander Phoom, do you understand what you're proposing? The last resort protocol has never been activated. Not once in the 12,000 cycles of the Alliance's existence." "Yes, sir, I do." Jazek straightened his posture, all 4 arms at attention. "And I also understand that if we don't try something drastically different, there won't be an alliance for another cycle." Cryon sighed, a sound like wind through ancient caverns. "Very well, Commander. You've made your point. But when this goes horribly wrong, and note I said when, not if I'll personally ensure you're assigned to waste management on the methane moons of Boraxis Prime for the remainder of your career." Jazek's antennae drooped slightly. "Understood, sir." "Thank you, sir." As the council adjourned, Science Officer Tazar approached Jazek with an expression of mixed pity and fascination. "You actually did it. You convinced them to unleash the humans." "Don't remind me," Jazek muttered, his scales shifting to an anxious purple. "Now we just have to convince the humans to help us." "And hope," Tazar added dryly, "that their help doesn't end up being worse than the Voidcrawlers." The command center of the Alliance flagship Eternal Vigilance buzzed with frantic activity. Holographic displays showed the advancing Voidcrawler forces as angry red blotches spreading across the galactic map like some kind of interstellar infection. 17 systems, Jazek muttered, zooming in on the latest casualty, the Proxima Centauri outpost. 17 systems in less than 6 lunar cycles. Science officer Lumi Tazar hovered nearby, her translucent wings vibrating with anxiety. At just under 5 feet tall, with iridescent skin that changed color with her thoughts, she looked deceptively delicate. But Jazek knew her mind was sharper than a Zrixian battle claw. "The Voidcrawlers adapt too quickly," she said, manipulating the holographic controls with practiced precision. "Each time we deploy a new defensive strategy, they counter it within days. It's as if they can predict our tactics." "That's because they can," Jazek replied grimly. "We fight according to the grand military doctrine, the same tactical manual every Alliance species has followed for 12 millennia. Logical, efficient, and now completely useless." A junior officer approached with a fresh datapad. "Commander, the Bellatrix system has fallen. Voidcrawler harvester ships have already begun strip mining the outer planets." Jazek's scales flashed a deep blue of despair. "Dismissed, Lieutenant." When they were alone again, Tazar leaned in. "You've been spending a lot of time in the ancient archives. Have you found anything useful?" Jazek glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Actually, yes, something fascinating and terrifying." He pulled up a classified file on his personal datapad. "Did you know the humans were once full members of the Alliance?" Tazar's skin paled to nearly white. "That can't be right. They're quarantined savages." "Not always," Jazek said, showing her records dating back over 3 centuries. "They joined the Alliance briefly, about 300 years ago. Then there was an incident." "What kind of incident?" Tazar asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her shock. Jazek's voice dropped to a whisper. "The Battle of Rigel 9. The Alliance was losing badly to the Orsorl Horde. Standard tactics were failing. The human contingent, without authorization, broke formation," and he paused, clearly uncomfortable. "And what?" "What?" "They started fighting dirty. Abandoned all military protocols, set traps, used psychological warfare, basically ignored every rule of civilized combat." Jazek's scales rippled with discomfort. "They won the battle but were immediately quarantined afterward for, and I quote, barbaric tactics unbecoming of a civilized species." Tazar blinked all 4 of her eyes simultaneously. "And now you want to unleash them again? Are you sure that's wise?" "Wise? No. Necessary? Absolutely." Jazek pulled up the latest surveillance data on Earth. "Look at them, Lumi. They're incredible. Terrifying, but incredible." The hologram showed Earth in all its chaotic glory. Humans waging wars over invisible borders. Humans competing in dangerous sports for entertainment. Humans deliberately seeking out the most extreme environments on their planet for fun. "They've had over 200 major conflicts on their planet in the past century alone," Jazek noted. "They fight constantly, even amongst themselves." "That's not a selling point, Jazek," Tazar said dryly. "Isn't it, though?" Jazek countered. "They've become experts at warfare through constant practice. And look here," he pointed to military footage of human special forces in training. "They adapt. They improvise. They don't follow predictable patterns." Tazar watched the footage with growing fascination and horror. Their bodies are so fragile. No natural armor. No enhanced senses. Yet they compensate with these tools. Tools they constantly improve and adapt, Jazek added. Their entire history is one long arms race with themselves. The Voidcrawlers won't know what hit them. The ship's alert system suddenly blared. Admiral Creon's voice boomed over the comms, "Commander Phoom, to the bridge immediately. The Voidcrawlers have breached the Arcturus defense line." Jazek and Tazar exchanged grim looks. "How long until they reach Alliance Central?" Tazar asked quietly. "At their current pace? 2 weeks, maybe less?" Jazek straightened his uniform. We're out of options, Lumi. Either we try something crazy, or we prepare for extinction, she finished. Go talk to the Admiral. I'll prepare a diplomatic vessel for Earth. As Jazek hurried toward the bridge, he wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake in Alliance history, or its salvation. Either way, the galaxy was about to get much, much more interesting. Remind me again why we had to be the ones to make first contact. Jazek grumbled as their diplomatic shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere. Lumi Tazar, busy calibrating her universal translator, barely glanced up. Because it was your brilliant idea to unleash the barbarians, and Admiral Quion thought it would be, quote, poetically just for you to face the consequences of your suggestion personally. Rhetorical question, Lumi. Jazek sighed, his scales shifting to an embarrassed purple. And they're not barbarians, technically. They have technology, culture, and wait, are they shooting at us? A series of bright flashes appeared from the ground below, followed by the shuttle's defensive systems automatically engaging. Just their standard greeting protocol, apparently, Tazar said, checking the sensor readings. According to our briefing, they fire warning shots at any unidentified aircraft entering their airspace. Very hospitable. Wonderful, Jazek muttered. Perhaps we should have called ahead? With what? They're still using primitive radio waves and haven't developed proper telepathic amplifiers. Tazar's wings fluttered in exasperation. I've sent the peace signal on all frequencies. They should. The shuttle abruptly stopped shaking as the weapon's fire ceased. There we go, Tazar said smugly. They received our diplomatic credentials. We're being directed to a landing facility in a place called Nevada. Fascinating architecture. Very angular. 30 minutes later, Jazek stood awkwardly in a sterile white room, watching as a group of humans in military uniforms entered. He'd studied human appearance extensively, but seeing them in person was still jarring. So few limbs, such exposed skin, and those flat faces with their bizarrely immobile features. A human female with dark hair pulled tight against her head stepped forward. Her uniform bore more decorative elements than the others, suggesting higher rank. I'm General Diana Martinez, United Earth Defense Force. Her voice was remarkably controlled, betraying no emotion. You're the first aliens to land on Earth in over 300 years. Care to explain why we shouldn't immediately blast you back into orbit? Jazek's translator caught the aggressive phrasing, and he felt his secondary heart skip a beat. Before he could formulate a properly diplomatic response, Tazar stepped forward. Your species was once part of the Galactic Alliance, she said bluntly. We need your help. Desperately. General Martinez's face suddenly contorted, and a loud barking sound emerged from her mouth. Jazek nearly activated his defensive scales before realizing this was human laughter. Let me get this straight, Martinez said between bursts of this alarming vocalization. You're the ones who quarantined us to our solar system for being too violent and unpredictable. Called us, what was it? Unfit for civilized galactic society? And now you need our help. Jazek shifted uncomfortably. The situation has evolved. Oh, this is too good, Martinez wiped at her eye with one finger. The mighty Alliance, with all its rules and protocols and superior technology, needs the barbaric humans to save them. The Voidcrawlers have conquered 17 systems, Tazar interjected, wings vibrating with urgency. They adapt to all conventional tactics. They harvest planets down to their cores. And they're 2 weeks from Alliance Central. That sobered Martinez quickly. She gestured toward a table. Sit down, commanders. Tell me everything. 3 hours later, after a detailed briefing that involved far more human interruptions and clarification questions than Jazek had anticipated, Martinez leaned back in her chair. We'll help you, she said finally. Jazek's antennae perked up in surprise at the quick agreement. You will? That's most logical. The Voidcrawlers would eventually reach Earth too, so mutual defense is. But Martinez cut him off. We have conditions. Of course, Jazek nodded. Reasonable compensation, appropriate technology transfers. Full Alliance membership, Martinez stated flatly. No more quarantine. Equal voting rights on the Alliance Council. And complete tactical autonomy during combat operations. Jazek nearly choked on his breathing filters. That's unprecedented. The Alliance military doctrine clearly states that all forces must operate under unified command with standardized. Yeah, and how's that working out for you? Martinez raised an eyebrow. 17 systems down and counting, right? We would need council approval for such terms, Tazar said carefully. And they may not be receptive. Then we stay home, Martinez shrugged. Good luck with your Voidcrawler problem. As they walked back to their shuttle with provisional agreement in hand contingent on council approval, Tazar glanced at her commander. Your scales are turning that sickly yellow color again. Do you know what we've just done, Lumi? Jazek whispered, even though no humans were within earshot. We're not just bringing humans into a conflict. We're going to unleash them on the entire Alliance. They want a seat at the table. They want to vote on interstellar policy. At least they're enthusiastic, Tazar offered. Their military is already mobilizing. General Martinez said they can have 5 battle groups ready in 3 days. That's the problem, Jazek moaned. They're too enthusiastic. Did you see their faces when we described the Voidcrawler ships? They weren't horrified, they were excited. One of them actually said, cool. Who gets excited about facing an enemy that has destroyed entire civilizations? Humans, apparently, Tazar replied, unable to hide her own fascination. Perhaps that's exactly why we need them. Jazek shook his head as they boarded the shuttle. I'm going to be cleaning methane filters on Boraxis Prime for the rest of my career. If we survive, that is. Which, given that our salvation apparently depends on a species that thinks jumping out of aircraft is fun, seems increasingly unlikely. The shuttle's engines hummed to life as Jazek stared out at the blue and green planet below. What had he unleashed upon the galaxy? And more immediately terrifying, what would Admiral Cryan say about these conditions? Jazek stared in horror at what had once been the pristine engine room of the Alliance flagship Eternal Vigilance. After just 3 days with humans aboard, it looked like a disaster zone. The cables hung from ceiling panels. Components lay scattered across workstations. And in the center of it all, a human male with disheveled black hair and a perpetual smirk on his face directed the chaos like some kind of deranged orchestra conductor. Captain Blackwood, Jazek said through gritted teeth, what exactly are you doing to our quantum propulsion system? Captain Jack Blackwood turned, a welding torch in one hand and some unidentifiable gadget in the other. His uniform, if you could call it, that was stained with various lubricants and bore none of the proper insignia of military rank. Just a patch that read problem solver above his breast pocket. Commander Phoom. Just the blue guy I wanted to see. Blackwood's voice boomed with inappropriate enthusiasm. We're boosting your engine efficiency by 38%. Maybe 40 if Sasha can reroute the secondary coolant system. You can't just, there are protocols. Jazek sputtered, his scales rippling between shocked white and furious red. These systems were designed by the finest engineers in 5 galaxies. Yeah, and they did a great job, Blackwood nodded, completely missing Jazek's outrage. Very neat, very logical, very predictable. He pointed the welding torch at a holographic display showing the Voidcrawler fleet. But those guys out there? They've figured out all your neat, logical, predictable systems. That's why they're winning. Before Jazek could formulate a properly scathing response, the ship's alert system blared. All personnel to battle stations. Voidcrawler scout vessels detected in Sector 7. Blackwood's face lit up like a child receiving a gift. Perfect timing. Now we can test our modifications in actual combat. Test. Jazek's voice rose to a pitch he didn't know he could achieve. You want to test experimental modifications during actual combat? When else would we test them? Blackwood asked with genuine confusion as he jogged toward the bridge, leaving Jazek to hurry after him. On the command deck, Admiral Cryon was already issuing standard battle protocols when Blackwood burst in, followed by 20 human officers who immediately spread out to different stations. Captain Blackwood, Cryon growled. This is a Class 3 encounter. Standard formation Delta applies in accordance with. With all due respect, Admiral, Blackwood interrupted, causing several Alliance officers to gasp at the breach of protocol. Delta formation is exactly what the Voidcrawlers are expecting. We're going to try something different. Before Cryon could object, Blackwood turned to his communications officer. Lieutenant Patel broadcast the package. A petite human female nodded and activated a series of commands on her console. Broadcasting on all frequencies, Captain. What package? Jazek asked, anxiety mounting. Oh, just some Earth music, memes, and cat videos, Blackwood said casually. Followed by some, let's call them anatomically explicit images of Voidcrawler ancestors we found in your biological database. You're doing what? Jazek shrieked. Electronic warfare, Blackwood explained, as if talking to a child. Jamming their comms while also hopefully confusing and enraging them. Tactical, Blackwood continued, addressing a tall human male. Are the modified torpedoes ready? Locked and loaded, Captain, the tactical officer replied with a grin that made Jazek's blood run cold. Modified how? Admiral Cryon demanded. We removed the antimatter warheads and replaced them with a combination of electromagnetic pulse generators and, well, glitter, Blackwood said. Glitter? Tazar repeated, all four eyes blinking in confusion. Tiny reflective particles, Blackwood explained, completely harmless, but almost impossible to get rid of, should blind their sensors beautifully. This is insanity, Jazek whispered to Tazar. Complete, total insanity. Fire at will, Mr. Bennett, Blackwood commanded with evident glee. What followed was 20 minutes of the most unorthodox, terrifying, and inexplicably effective combat Jazek had ever witnessed. The human-modified ships darted in impossible patterns, ignoring formation protocols that had been standard for millennia. The glitter torpedoes exploded among the Voidcrawler scouts, causing their precision sensors to go haywire. And through it all, Earth music, something Blackwood called heavy metal, blasted on all communication channels. When it was over, the Voidcrawler scouts were either destroyed or in full retreat, and the bridge erupted in human cheers and high-fives, a bizarre ritual of palm slapping that Jazek found both primitive and oddly infectious. See? Blackwood said, clapping Jazek on the back hard enough to make his scales rattle. Unpredictability is our specialty. The Voidcrawlers had no idea what hit them. Neither did I, Jazek muttered weakly, feeling his legs wobble. Admiral Cryon's massive form loomed over Blackwood, his eyes a dangerous orange. Captain Blackwood, my ready room. Now. Commander Phoom, you too. Once the door closed behind them, Cryon exploded. Glitter? Music? Cat videos? What in the 17 hells of Draxus Prime was that? Blackwood, somehow completely unfazed by the Admiral's rage, shrugged. That was a victory, sir. It was a violation of every combat protocol in the Alliance handbook. Cryon thundered. With all due respect, Admiral, Blackwood said, leaning forward, that handbook is exactly why you're losing this war. The Voidcrawlers have studied your tactics. They know what you're going to do before you do it. But they've never encountered humans before, and they sure as hell don't know what we're going to do. Cryon turned to Jazek, eyes narrowed. Commander Phoom, explain these unauthorized modifications to Alliance property. Jazek opened his mouth to disavow all knowledge, to throw the humans under the proverbial transport vehicle, to salvage what remained of his career, but then stopped. They had won. As chaotic and horrifying as it had been, the human approach had actually worked. The modifications, Jazek said carefully, were implemented under the tactical autonomy clause of our agreement with Earth. And while unconventional, they proved, he swallowed hard, effective. Creon's eyes shifted to a surprised purple. You're defending these barbarians? I'm defending results, Admiral, Jazek replied, surprising himself with his firmness. The Voidcrawlers expected us to follow the rulebook. Captain Blackwood threw away the rulebook and wrote a new one. In crayon, possibly, but it worked. Admiral Cryon stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Very well, but I want full reports on all future modifications. And, Captain, he turned to Blackwood. No more glitter without prior approval. The maintenance crews are threatening mutiny. As they exited the ready room, Blackwood turned to Jazek with newfound respect. You stuck up for us in there. I'm impressed. Don't be, Jazek sighed, his scales settling into a resigned gray. I've simply accepted that my career was over the moment I suggested contacting humans. I might as well embrace the madness. That's the spirit. Blackwood grinned, slapping him on the back again. Now, wait until you see what we've got planned for the main Voidcrawler fleet. Ever heard of something called a Trojan horse? Jazek felt a headache building in all three of his brains. No, but I have a terrible feeling I'm about to learn. Nexus station hung in space like a gleaming spiderweb, its vast docking arms extending in all directions as the combined fleet of the Galactic Alliance gathered for what might be their final stand. The massive space station served as the last major stronghold before Alliance Central, and intelligence reports confirmed that the main Voidcrawler armada was less than 12 hours away. In the central war room, the atmosphere was tense as military commanders from 17 species gathered around the holographic display. Admiral Cryon stood at the head of the table, his granite features set in grim determination. The Voidcrawler fleet outnumbers us 3-1, he stated flatly. Their harvest ships are protected by their most advanced dreadnoughts. Our simulations give us a 17% chance of victory using conventional tactics. But Captain Blackwood, who had somehow managed to get engine grease on the formal Alliance uniform he'd been forced to wear for the occasion, stepped forward. Permission to present an alternative approach, Admiral? Cryon's eyes flashed briefly to an irritated yellow before settling into a resigned blue. Proceed, Captain. Blackwood activated his datapad, and the holographic display shifted to show a bizarre battle formation that made several of the alien commanders blink in confusion. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of non-binary or undefined gender, Blackwood began with a grin. I'd like to introduce you to concepts we humans call guerrilla warfare and psychological warfare. Also trolling, but that's harder to translate. For the next 20 minutes, Blackwood outlined a battle plan so outrageous, so contrary to all established military doctrine, that one Paxilian commander actually fainted from shock, his tentacles going limp as his aides carried him from the room. You want to use our capital ships as decoys? General Vrex of the Taurian Legion bellowed, his bull-like features contorted with rage. While your smaller vessels sneak behind enemy lines using garbage as camouflage. Precisely, Blackwood nodded enthusiastically. The Voidcrawlers expect us to protect our most valuable assets. So we put those assets right up front, making a big show of desperately defending them, while our actual attack force mixed human and Alliance strike teams slip through their sensor grid disguised as debris. And once they're through? Cryon asked, unable to hide his fascination despite his skepticism. Blackwood's grin widened. That's where it gets fun. Commander Phoom, would you like to explain this part? It was your idea, after all. All eyes turned to Jazek, who cleared his third breathing passage nervously. Over the past weeks of working with humans, he'd found himself adapting to their chaotic thinking in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. The strike teams will target not the Voidcrawler weapons systems or engines. Jazek explained, but they're communication arrays. Captain Blackwood calls it cutting off the head of the snake. The Voidcrawlers operate on a hive mind tactical system. Disrupt their ability to coordinate, and individual ships lose much of their effectiveness. And how exactly do you propose to get strike teams onto heavily shielded Voidcrawler vessels? Asked Fleet Commander Norks, skepticism dripping from every word. Lieutenant Patel, the human communications officer, stepped forward. By inviting ourselves aboard, sir? Explain, Cryon demanded. We've cracked their authentication protocols, Patel said with evident pride. We can send signals that make their docking bays open for us, thinking we're friendly vessels returning from reconnaissance. The room erupted in a mixture of disbelief, outrage, and reluctant admiration. Through it all, Jazek watched Blackwood field questions with that infuriating human confidence, the absolute certainty that their insane plan would work simply because it was too crazy for anyone to expect it. 12 hours later, as Jazek clung to his command chair aboard one of the small strike vessels disguised as debris, he questioned every life choice that had led him to this moment. Around him, a mixed crew of humans and Alliance specialists worked with the focused intensity that preceded combat. Their ship, along with 30 others, drifted among actual garbage ejected from Nexus Station, waiting for the Voidcrawler fleet to pass overhead. This is absolute insanity, Jazek muttered for perhaps the 100th time. Beside him, Tazar's wings vibrated with what might have been fear or excitement. The line between the two emotions had blurred considerably since they started working with humans. Maybe, she whispered, but you have to admit, it's not boring. The comms crackled to life with Blackwood's voice. Decoy fleet, engaging Voidcrawlers now. Strike teams, maintain radio silence, and stick to the plan. Remember, we're not trying to outfight them, we're trying to outthink them. Blackwood out. Through the viewport, Jazek watched as the main Alliance fleet made a grand, desperate stand against the Voidcrawler armada. The space around Nexus Station lit up with weapons fire in a dazzling, terrifying display. And they're taking heavy damage, Tazar noted anxiously as Alliance ships exploded under the Voidcrawler assault. All part of the plan, Lieutenant Patel reminded her from the communications station. They just need to sell it for another few minutes. As the Voidcrawler fleet advanced through the debris field, their massive harvester ships pushing forward under heavy escort, Jazek felt his secondary heart racing. Now? He asked, looking at Patel. The lieutenant's fingers danced across her console as she monitored the Voidcrawler communications. Almost now. Transmitting false authentication codes. What followed was 45 minutes of the most harrowing, unorthodox combat Jazek had ever experienced. Their small vessel, along with the others in the strike force, was drawn into a Voidcrawler docking bay, where they immediately deployed with weapons blazing. Human soldiers moved with a reckless abandon that shocked even the Voidcrawlers, charging into overwhelming odds with battle cries and, in some inexplicable cases, laughter. By the time Jazek's team reached the communication hub of the massive Voidcrawler vessel, he'd witnessed humans using tactics that would get any Alliance officer court-martialed. They rigged explosive devices from spare parts. They used maintenance ducts instead of main corridors. One particularly creative human sergeant even reprogrammed a Voidcrawler service drone to play something called "Never Gonna Give You Up" over the ship's internal speakers, apparently a psychological warfare technique called rickrolling. When it was over, when the coordinated strike teams had successfully disabled the communications arrays of 17 key Voidcrawler vessels, the tide of battle shifted dramatically. Without central coordination, the dreaded armada fell into disarray. Alliance forces, rallying under Admiral Cryon's command, pressed the advantage ruthlessly. 3 hours later, the remaining Voidcrawler ships fled, leaving behind their prized harvester vessels and thousands of confused drone fighters drifting aimlessly in space. In the aftermath, as damage reports flooded in and medical teams tended the wounded, Jazek found himself standing in Nexus Station's observation deck, staring out at the debris field that marked their unlikely victory. Admiral Qui-Gon and the gathered Alliance commanders had been in stunned silence for a full minute after the battle report concluded. Everything they did, General Vrex finally said, breaking the silence, violated centuries of established military doctrine. They used garbage as a tactical element, Fleet Commander Norks added, sounding personally offended. And music as a weapon, another commander noted. And yet, Admiral Cryon said slowly, his eyes shifting to a thoughtful green, they won. We won. He turned to Jazek. Commander Phoom, when you first proposed activating the last resort protocol, I thought you had lost your mind. Perhaps you had, or perhaps... He paused, searching for the right words. Perhaps madness was exactly what this situation required. Jazek felt a strange mix of pride and alarm as Cryon continued. I am recommending that all Alliance military forces begin immediate training in these human tactics. The Voidcrawlers are in retreat, but they will regroup. When they return, they will find not just humans waiting for them, but an entire alliance that has learned to embrace unpredictability. The gathered commanders exchanged nervous glances, but none voiced objection. How could they, in the face of such a decisive victory? As the meeting adjourned, Tazar approached Jazek with a datapad. The humans are already proposing modifications to our entire defensive grid, she said with a mixture of resignation and amusement. Something about booby traps and, quote, home alone protocols, whatever that means. Jazek sighed deeply. The galaxy will never be the same, will it? No, Tazar agreed, her wings fluttering gently. But perhaps that's not such a bad thing. In the distance, they could hear the unmistakable sound of human celebration, a mixture of laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses filled with substances that Jazek was quite certain violated at least 3 Alliance health protocols. I suppose we should join them, he said reluctantly. Actually, Tazar replied with unexpected enthusiasm, I've been curious about this human concept called dancing. For scientific purposes, of course. As they walked toward the sound of celebration, Jazek wondered what other human concepts would soon infiltrate Alliance culture. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and, he had to admit, just a little bit exciting. 3 months after the Battle of Nexus Station, Commander Jazek Phoom sat in his quarters aboard the Eternal Vigilance, putting the final touches on his official report. Outside his viewport, Alliance space bustled with unprecedented activity as the formerly rigid military underwent what humans called a complete overhaul. Jazek's scales shifted to a contemplative blue as he dictated the conclusion. In summary, while the integration of human forces into Alliance military operations initially presented significant challenges to established protocols, the results cannot be disputed. The Voidcrawler threat has been neutralized, with their remaining forces retreating beyond the Cygnus expanse. Intelligence reports suggest they are regrouping, but current projections give us at least 2 standard years before they attempt another incursion. He paused, considering his next words carefully. It must be acknowledged that human methodologies, while unorthodox and occasionally in direct violation of the grand military doctrine, proved remarkably effective against an enemy that had adapted to our standard tactics. Their emphasis on unpredictability, psychological warfare, and improvisation created advantages that conventional approaches could not achieve. Jazek hesitated before adding the final recommendation. Therefore, I formally support the Council's decision to reinstate humanity as full members of the Galactic Alliance, with all associated rights and privileges. Their unique perspective may be precisely what the Alliance needs to face future threats in an ever-evolving galaxy. He submitted the report with a sense of fatalistic acceptance. 6 months ago, such a recommendation would have been unthinkable career suicide at minimum. Now it was practically a foregone conclusion. The door chime sounded, and Jazek composed himself. Enter. Science Officer Tazar stepped in, looking distinctly uncomfortable in her new uniform redesigned with human input to be more practical and less stuffy, as Captain Blackwood had put it. "You're not going to believe this," she said, wings fluttering with agitation. "The Paxillian High Command has just established a Department of Human Tactical Studies. They are studying us now." Jazek couldn't help but laugh, another habit he'd picked up from the humans. Of course they are. The Taurians have already sent 50 of their elite warriors to train with human special forces on Earth. "It's spreading throughout the Alliance," Tazar continued, pulling up reports on her datapad. "The Zrixians are studying human sports for combat applications. The Volturi Conclave is analyzing human entertainment media for psychological warfare techniques. Even the Eeld Collective is experimenting with human cooking, claiming the unpredictable flavor combinations expand neural pathways." "The ultimate irony," Jazek mused. "We quarantined humans for being too unpredictable and chaotic, and now everyone wants to learn how to be more like them." "Not everyone is happy about it," Tazar noted. "The traditionalists are claiming we're abandoning 12,000 years of civilized development to embrace barbarism." "Perhaps," Jazek conceded, "but it's effective barbarism. And after witnessing what the Voidcrawlers would do to our worlds, I'll take effective over civilized any day." His communication panel chimed with an incoming message from Admiral Cryon requesting his presence on the bridge. Apparently, Captain Blackwood was proposing further improvements to the flagship's defensive systems, something involving what humans called paintball technology, adapted for space warfare. As they walked to the bridge, Tazar asked, "Do you regret it? Activating the last resort protocol?" Jazek considered the question seriously. "The Alliance is changing, Lumi. Drastically and rapidly. Old certainties are being questioned. Traditions are being challenged. It's messy and chaotic and terrifying." His scales shifted through several colors before settling on a calm green. "But we're alive to see it happen, and that counts for something." When they reached the bridge, they found Admiral Cryon engaged in a surprisingly animated discussion with Captain Blackwood and General Martinez, who had been appointed as Earth's representative to the Alliance Council. "Commander Phoom," Cryon acknowledged him with a nod. "We were just discussing the implementation of these paintball torpedoes. Your input would be valuable, given your experience with unconventional tactics." Jazek suppressed a sigh. 6 months ago, unconventional would have been the worst insult an Alliance officer could receive. Now it was practically a commendation. "I defer to Captain Blackwood's expertise in creative weaponry, Admiral," Jazek replied diplomatically. "Though perhaps we could test them thoroughly before deploying them in actual combat?" Blackwood grinned. "Where's the fun in that?" As the discussion continued, Jazek found himself watching the easy interaction between species that would have been unthinkable before the Voidcrawler threat. Humans, with their bizarre customs and incomprehensible jokes, working alongside beings they referred to as blue guys and rock dudes, with casual disregard for proper taxonomic designations. And somehow, it worked. Later, as the senior staff reviewed the new defense initiatives, Admiral Cryon pulled Jazek aside. "You know, Commander," the massive alien said quietly, his eyes a reflective shade of blue, "when this all began, I was certain you doomed us by recommending we contact the humans." "As was I, Admiral," Jazek admitted. "And yet here we stand," Cryon continued, "not just surviving, but thriving, adapting, becoming something new." He glanced across the room where Blackwood was demonstrating some human combat technique to fascinated Alliance officers. "I've been in service for over 200 cycles, Commander Phoom. I've seen civilizations rise and fall. But I've never seen anything quite like the effect these humans have had on us." "They are certainly unique, sir." Admiral Cryon's granite features shifted into what might have been a smile. "Indeed. Deed. And it makes one wonder." He looked out at the stars beyond the viewport, where Alliance ships now practiced unpredictable flight patterns inspired by Earth insects called butterflies. "Perhaps our last resort should have been our first call." Jazek's antennae twitched in amusement. "Don't tell Captain Blackwood that, sir." His ego is insufferable enough already. As if on cue, a loud cheer erupted from across the bridge where Blackwood had apparently said something the Alliance officers found hilarious. The sound of laughter, once rare on Alliance vessels, now echoed through the halls with increasing frequency. Chaotic? Absolutely. Unpredictable? Without question. But as Jazek watched the formerly rigid Admiral Cryon venture over to join the conversation, he realized something important. The galaxy wasn't just surviving the human influence, it was coming alive. And for a former by-the-book commander who once feared chaos above all things, Jazek Phoom had to admit there was something strangely wonderful about that.